Marathon 127. How's our people? How y'all doing? Is everybody having a good new year? Let's get rolling with 4 stories. All 4 of them are really good. The last 2 are going to blow your socks off. I hope you guys enjoy them. Let's get rolling with it. All right, here we go. Never shared my story except with my father, but I like to listen to and believe the stories from other hunters. They lived them, and who am I to tell them what they saw? It doesn't take much imagination for me to feel like I'm right there with the person in your stories at the time of their encounters. My name is Bob, and I'm 79 years old. I stopped hunting when I was 59. I hated giving up hunting, but I had sport knees and it was getting too hard to walk in the forest and the mountains. I sure miss the elk meat and the venison. I know that Bigfoot has been here forever. I started to read about them when I was 12. There wasn't much to read about them in those days, but every once in a while you would hear a strange story that a hunter or a camper had seen one, or something they couldn't explain, or experienced being harassed by something they never saw. They just heard it or smelled it. But no one talked about it for fear of being crazy, because no one believed that Bigfoot existed. I also never spoke to any of my friends about seeing one. I don't believe they would have believed me anyway. I saw the only one I've ever seen when I was 15 years old. It was October 1956, and I was elk and deer hunting on Canfield Mountain just outside of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I lived just 10 miles from Canfield Mountain, so after school I used to drive my old car up to Canfield and find an old logging road and walk it, 3 steps at a time until it got dark. The huge thing, at least 8 foot tall and I would guess 500 to 600 pounds, stepped out of the trees onto the old logging road about 25 yards in front of me. It was getting dark and I was on my way back to the car. I only saw it for maybe 20 seconds before it disappeared back into the brush and the trees. I don't remember hearing any bushes breaking or other noise as it disappeared. I was probably too shocked to notice. I did see that it was a brownish and black color. I don't recall any odor. Its face was lighter and hairless. I don't recall the facial features either. It scared the crap out of me. I knew immediately I wasn't looking at a bear. I had my 300 H&H mag with me, but I never thought to shoot it. Hell, I couldn't even move. My father was an avid hunter. He started me hunting with him when I was 10. He taught me that you only shoot or hunt what you're going to eat. He said he saw one in the 1950s 70 yards away while hunting on Brown Creek Saddle. He said it was a good thing I didn't shoot it because I probably would have just pissed it off and it would have killed me. I never stopped hunting on Canfield Mountain, and I was back just a week later hunting there. I figured I would probably never see another Bigfoot again, but I watched out for one every time I went into the woods. I can recall the feeling I was being watched in other parts of northern Idaho when I was hunting. I listen to your show all the time. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. It's a great show, very interesting and good entertainment. I just wanted to tell my story. And you were right. The Bigfoot story and what they are is known by many, but for some reason no one is talking about it but the honest people who have seen one. There's so many people who are phonies who want to join their sites and send money. So many that know absolutely nothing about hunting or animals. They lie and they tear down good honest people who have had encounters with Bigfoot. The old platitude, no evidence, no body, no DNA, phony pictures, and so forth. And so many shows trying to make money off of Bigfoot with their phony shows about hunting Bigfoot. I wish they would see one and it would chase them. I hope they have a lot of toilet paper with them so they can clean up. Why don't these brave hunters hunt in places that are active for Bigfoot? Are they afraid they might find one or be found by one? LOL, that would be so much fun to watch. Yeah, that would, Bob. The views of the writer sometimes aren't the views of the host of this show, but I kind of agree with him on that. And I think he's talking about the big A&E shows and history. I don't know what networks they're all on. Finding Bigfoot, Hunting Bigfoot, all that stuff. I watched a few episodes of those, and Finding Bigfoot should be renamed Finding Nothing. But the characters are interesting in it, and it is good entertainment. But for somebody who has seen one and sees a lot of this hoopla on television and on YouTube and other places, I can see where they can sniff out the phonies, because it should be pretty obvious to them. It's not to me, because I've never seen a Bigfoot, never experienced that. And forthcoming, they run ads in my videos, and YouTube pays me to run ads in the videos, and I don't make a killing off of it, but, it buys gas and groceries, and it actually helps me pay a car note, and it pays for all of the recording gear and all the stuff that I buy to produce these things. So, and I'm not going to turn that money down. And I've even got a podcast going that I'm not making a penny off of. I've really poured a lot of work into that thing, and I'm trying to gain sponsors for it. So, everybody likes to make a buck, but I think I understand what Bob is saying, that people are, if you're going to make money on something, you probably need to be an expert in the field. You need to know what you're talking about, or people will sniff it out. And that's, I think, what's happened with Finding Bigfoot. I don't know that the producers of the show really care about finding Bigfoot. I think they just care about putting out a good, entertaining show, and that's fine. I don't really know what I'm talking about. And as far as I go, I don't ever claim to know anything about Bigfoot. I just claim to love good stories. And so if there's any expertise that goes with my end of this Bigfoot topic, it's maybe the production value of this show, or just the love of the story. And I don't mind getting paid for it. I don't think, people do YouTube to get paid. They always, that's kind of the mark of a decent channel, when they start paying you. And it's a pretty steep threshold to get to where you even do get paid. I could go on and on about the pitfalls of YouTube. I'm dealing with something now you wouldn't believe. You would not believe it if I told you. And when the dispute is finally settled, maybe I'll tell you guys about it. But it's highway theft is what it is. There's somebody actually stealing income that off of my creations on YouTube, and YouTube won't do anything about it. It's real frustrating. Okay, I'm just rambling. Why do I do this? Let's move on to the next story. Bob, thank you very much. It's a great story, and I appreciate your email. This is an email from Greg. Here's what he writes. I had an experience 2 years ago that really warped my brain, and I think that the time has finally come where I can talk about it. I'm so thankful that you provide a safe place where I and others like me can feel comfortable telling our stories. Thank you for that. I live in northern Ontario in Canada. I heard you joking recently that we here in the Great White North should choose names of places that are easy to say. Well, not to worry, my friend. I will not burden you with any difficult words today. Anyway, as I said, 2 years ago, I decided to do a little late season camping. It was the end of October, and the rain and the wind were wreaking havoc. I don't know what the temperature was, but it was cold, and I know that I could see my breath. When I go out, I like to be as far away from people as I can get. I have a habit of following remote roads until I can't go any further, and then I look for a suitable campsite nearby. On this day, I had followed an old logging road about 35 kilometers until I came across a very deep and wide washout across the road. On the other side of the washout was a bridge that passed over the river, and it fed an adjoining lake. I remember thinking that it was odd that the road would wash out next to the bridge where the water could travel freely under, but nature will do what she wants, I guess. It was impossible for me to proceed any further, and as luck would have it, I had stopped next to a really nice camping area right on the shoreline of that beautiful lake. I wheeled into that spot and proceeded to set up camp. The wind and the rain were still blowing, but I knew that the weather was expected to let up late in the afternoon. A few hours later, the weather did not let up as promised, and the sun started to set. I decided to turn in early that night as the weather made it impossible to take my canoe out for an evening of fishing. Being alone in a canoe in strong winds is a losing battle, so I conceded to simply retire to my tent and try to get an early start the next morning. The cold and the noise of the wind, however, did their best to ruin that plan and kept me from falling into anything more than a half sleep. Laying in my tent for a few hours in that half-dazed slumber, I could hear the blustering winds slowly easing up, and after a while it had slipped into a complete utter silence. There was not a sound to be heard. The silence, as they say, was deafening. It was almost surreal. I had awakened enough at this point to pay attention to the silence. It was so odd that I was on guard and was a little nervous because I had never experienced such perfect silence while camping. That did, however, change in a big hurry. That silence that was so disturbing a second ago was dramatically broken by a near-deafening crack and directly followed by a deep resonating splash. The very loud crack was at first interrupted by my brain as a rifle shot, but I quickly realized it was a large stone striking a rock face behind my tent and then bouncing into the lake. The rock face was a mere 10 or 15 meters behind me. I was on high alert now. I listened for any other sounds that would help me identify what was going on, but I heard nothing in that perfect silence. No footfalls, no grunts, no sounds at all. I was racing through scenarios. Was it an animal that knocked the stone off the overhang? Was it a bear overturning rocks looking for food along the shoreline? As my brain was trying to interpret this situation, a second large stone fell directly into the water. It was, by my estimate, a larger stone than the first one because it created a much deeper thud as it broke the surface of the water. I was up on my feet now in my tent, deciding if I should investigate, or at least be at the ready if things took a turn for the worst. And then another large stone fell directly into the water with a resounding thump splash. That was it for me. I had no intention to be going head-to-head with any forest critter that could throw boulders. The last thing I wanted at that point was to be inside that tent in the dark and having boulders falling on me. Whatever it was trying to send me a message, and I received that memo loud and clear. I promptly unzipped the tent flap and made a dash for my truck, started it up, and I removed myself from that place as quickly as that old beat-up logging road would allow. I spent the night in my truck some distance from there, and everything was uneventful. When the sun came up the next morning, I returned to the campsite so that I could retrieve my canoe and camping gear. I looked around the area and I took some photos with my phone for reference. The rear of the campsite had a row of scrub brush and trees about 3 meters deep, and directly behind that was the rock face from where the rocks were being thrown. And yes, they were being thrown. I paddled out onto the lake to check out that rock face with my canoe, and there was no way those rocks could have rolled down on their own. It was just too shallow of an angle for that to happen, and there were ledges with brush on them. Even if the rocks had found their way rolling down, the ledges would have made their journey very difficult. Gravity alone could not drag them through those brush-filled ledges, not to mention I would have heard them crashing down that rock face to the water. I packed my gear up and I left. I mentioned my experience to a few friends and learned that talking about such things is most definitely the wrong thing to do unless you like ridicule and being the butt of never-ending Sasquatch jokes. And yes, I do believe that it was a Sasquatch throwing those rocks. There's nothing that I know of in these parts that can throw a stone except a human being. I'm convinced it was not a person up on that bluff that night, as they would have had to approach my campsite on foot in the wind and rain earlier in the day, through many kilometers of brush, and wait there until nightfall in perfect silence, just to throw a few stones into the water to scare me. I know that no one came up the road before or after me because I looked for fresh tire tracks when I left that day, and my tires were the only ones that passed over that road for quite a while. Now here's where my story gets weird, and I come to the part that messes with my brain in a way that I could never have expected. All winter I was bothered by this experience. I desperately wanted to go back there and look up on that bluff and check out the area and look for some kind of proof, either for or against my experience as being authentic. I was obsessed with just knowing one way or the other whether that was a Sasquatch experience or not. Spring finally came, and around the end of March I was finally able to venture into that spot again and investigate. Remember earlier that I said I was there at the end of October on the previous fall? That time of the year is very close to the time when snow starts rolling in. And when the snow starts around here, it's relentless. The weather coming off Lake Superior ensures that the snow accumulates fast early in November, and it is not uncommon to have a meter of snow on the ground in this area by Christmas. When I did arrive at the bridge, I was astounded to see that the washout that was there last fall was now gone. The road was completely normal and intact. My first reaction was that it must have been repaired, but when and how? There was no logging in the area, so a logging company could not have done it without good reason. There were no properties or cottages in the area. I looked for a spot where a large amount of material would have been taken for fill, but there was none. I looked up and down the road and saw no evidence that any heavy equipment had been in there. In fact, the road into the place was so bad for a 500-meter stretch just before the lake that I had a difficult time getting in there with my four-wheel drive. I inspected the road where the washout was located, and it had grass and shrubs that were there from the previous years. It was as if there was never any washout at all. The ground had not been disturbed in any way that I could see. In addition to that, between November and when I was there in the spring would have made it impossible to repair the road because of the snow. There would have been no access to that location. I parked in the campsite and I looked around. There were elements of that spot that were different also. The line of shrub brush and trees that bordered the rear of the campsite were all gone. The previous fall, while I packed up camp and left, I had checked that line of scrub. It was thick enough that I had a moderate amount of difficulty to get through it to see the bluff behind it. Now it was all gone. Trees and all. No stumps, no debris, nothing but mud where a substantial amount of trees and shrubbery had previously stood. The photos that I had taken were unfortunately gone also. The phone on which I had taken the pictures had been stolen during the winter. I don't have any explanation for any of this. I just know that this event fundamentally changed my view of the world around me. The rock throwing was one thing, but the changed landscape made no sense to me at all, and my poor brain just did not know how to process this information, and I still don't know what to do with it. I think about this often. I think about it daily, but I'm not able to reconcile what I know was there in the fall and what I saw in the spring. Well, that's my story. I'm no longer looking for answers because I'm afraid this will just get more weird. I'm smart enough to know when I'm beat, and the miasma just does not want me to know the answer to this one right now, and I'm okay with that. Well, Greg, that's a good story. It's not a visual encounter, and the rocks may or may not have been Bigfoot, but the changed landscape, there's a washout, then you go back in the spring and the washout is not there and things are growing where the where the washout was. Are you sure you were in the right place? That would be the only thing that I would suggest is make, I mean, I'm not questioning you. I'm just saying I've been to places before and I want to go back a year later or 2 years later and I go back to where I think I was and everything looks different, but I know I'm in the right place, but I'm really not. I'm not in the right place. I just needed to go another 2 miles down the road. That is very strange. I mean, that would mean if this was Bigfoot related, that Bigfoot is a contractor and he fixes road washouts and things like that. I don't know that that's what you're suggesting at all. I'm not saying you're suggesting that one bit, but it kind of alludes to the fact that if you believe Bigfoot is involved in all this activity, then he would be fixing and pulling up brush and clearing out land and things like that. So, and maybe I'm totally misunderstanding exactly what's going on. Probably if we sat across the table from each other and you talked about it, you could go, no, that's not what I mean. This is what I think's going on, or this is what I saw. But from your letter, that's what it looks like. Anyway, it's a great story. It's a great story. I mean, laying there in perfect silence and rocks bouncing down a rock face, or that's not even vertical. It's almost horizontal. Boom, boom, and then a big splash. That you're right. Stuff like that doesn't happen. And bears and big animals that could lift rocks don't throw them like that. That was a scary night. All right, buddy. Thanks for the email. I'm glad you sent it, and we all enjoyed it. This story is, the writer does not want his name revealed, and that's fine. Hey, Betsy. I'm sorry. As soon as I hit the record button, my little black pit bull comes over. She comes over and she just lays her chin on my leg at this chair. She just wants me to pet her a minute, and I don't mind. Good girl. All right, go lay down. Go lay down, sweetie. Go. This writer does not want his name revealed, and here's what he writes. It was late in the year, and I was a 16-year-old son of a coal miner and an avid deer hunter. My father showed me an old wagon trail that cuts around the top of the mountain, leading up a couple of miles to an old farmhouse where the deer hunting was likely to be good. To get up there, even on my four-wheeler, I'd had to clear the road of small trees. There wasn't much left of the old farmhouse beyond its stone chimney and foundation, but I worked hard to clear a path out behind where 3 or 4 apple trees stood in a field, along with a few other small trees. Back behind that field, I'd found a really nice deer trail, so I hung my tree stand there and I left. Deer season was still a week away. A week later, I was excited to make the 2-hour trip up to the old farmhouse on my four-wheeler because of all the good sign I'd seen when I was up there before. It was a foggy morning, the kind of heavy fog that soaks in your clothes. It was so dense I had to turn my headlights off to see. Once I got up there, I left my four-wheeler at the farmhouse, and I began my trek out to the deer stand to begin the day. I was halfway to the stand when I heard something walking in the wood line that ran down the edge of the field. That fog was really setting the kind of slasher movie atmosphere that would put anybody on edge. My vision was extremely limited, so I took a few more steps and then I stopped. Whatever it was took about 3 or 4 more steps. I really didn't know what to think about that, so I just moved on. 40 yards from my stand, I stopped again, and again I heard 4 or 5 more footsteps before it stopped too. Between the dense fog and my dim flashlight, I couldn't see much, but I could definitely hear it. I knew something was out there, so I quickly climbed up into my deer stand, and not a minute too soon. I could hear footsteps coming directly at me as I climbed up the tree. I was 30 feet off the ground when I heard it directly below. I felt a thud against the tree, followed by another that made me think it was going to climb up after me. I was trying to get my flashlight out of my pocket, and I was fumbling with it when I dropped it, leaving me blind and vulnerable to the foggy darkness. Now I could hear this thing walking around and around my tree, and I was sure at any moment it was going to climb up the tree to where I was, so I got my bow positioned and I was ready to do battle. My heart was pounding. I had no idea what was down there or when it was going to come up to see me. I was poised for action and holding my breath when the sun broke the horizon, tracing the line between land and sky in a familiar pink color. Whatever was at the foot of my tree turned then and walked down in a hollow somewhere off to my left. I managed to stay in the tree and hunt all day, but my mind kept going back to the thing that I'd encountered in the pre-dawn. I didn't see any deer that day, and I stayed until dark, about the time deer start coming out. I finally had to accept that there would be no deer that day, and I got my gear ready for the climb down. Climbing down, I was 8 feet above the ground, and I heard twigs snapping. Something was coming from the hollow behind me now. While I was still trying to identify that sound, I saw a large black silhouette run past from my right. For a second, I thought it was coming directly at me, but it wasn't. It was running straight at the twig snapping thing from the hollow behind me. They collided like a couple of titanic football linebackers, slamming their bodies against each other and exhaling furious roars as they did so. I couldn't see anything in the dark, but I could hear as an awful fight ensued. They were screaming and growling as they threw each other over the ground, thumping and shaking the earth. Electric tension filled the air as they regained their footing and charged at each other again and again, knocking the wind from each other, slapping at and hitting each other, and then wrestling each other to the ground again. My harness kept me from turning around and seeing anything, so all I could do was listen. As the two combatants carried their fight down into the hollow, I seized the opportunity and grabbed my tree stand, threw it on my back, and walked as fast as I could back to my four-wheeler. On my way back, I began to hear the twigs snapping again, like someone was stomping, but I didn't look back. I didn't know if the fight was over and the victor was coming to claim his prize, or if this was another one altogether. I just knew I needed to get to my four-wheeler and get out of there. It only took a second to get it fired up, and I flew down the trail wide open, never looking back. This is my story. I'm an outdoorsman. I've camped on that mountain all my life. I'm 46 years old now, and I know there's something on that mountain. I hope your listeners will find this story interesting. What? You think we might find this interesting? God bless you and have a good evening. And he signs off. Man, would that just be awesome it would be awesome and very scary, but it would be awesome to hear these things fighting, like two males challenging each other for breeding rights or just because they're hacked off at each other. What an experience. There's nothing I can add to that. His story was absolutely totally descriptive, and I'm wondering if he goes back in that area anymore to hunt. Sounds like a good place to hunt deer. I don't think I would go back in there, but that's just me. Sir, thank you so much for a great story. I really do appreciate it. It was wonderful. All right, let's see if we can work one more story in here. I got a little bit of time. Let's do one more. The writer wants to keep his name anonymous. I'm in my early 50s now, and I never had any interest in Bigfoot until about 7 years ago. At that time, we moved from Massachusetts to western North Carolina. Financially, the move was ideal. We were able to buy a bigger house on a little acreage and still pay lower taxes. I'm a contractor, so within a month of moving in, I began building an addition off my kitchen. Typical of all renovations, there were pallets of wood shingles and such in the yard and a big dumpster where a few times late at night I'd heard some strange noises. We were in a fairly remote area, so I wrote it off as a bear rummaging through the dumpster. But just to be safe, I told my kids not to go near it, and I didn't give it much more thought. One night in early November, around 11 p.m., my wife and I heard grunting and other odd sounds out behind the new addition. I couldn't really see anything from my bedroom window, so I decided to be slick. I grabbed a flashlight and I went out the front door with an idea of sneaking around and surprising whatever was out there. In the dark, I crept around the back. I skirted the garage, and then, in the last second, I flipped on the flashlight, pointing it in the direction of the noise. Standing 25 feet in front of me was the ugliest monster I have ever seen. I felt my heart physically stop. I was frozen in my tracks, but my mind was going 1,000 directions at once. This thing was maybe a foot taller than me and dragging a deer behind it. I was on the uphill end of an incline, so I might be off a little on the height. Its face was like the Neanderthal in the Them and Us book, except its eyes and nose were a little more human. I could not believe what I was seeing. After a few seconds, instinct overruled my mind. I dropped the flashlight and I ran. White men may not have jumping skills, but that night I proved, given the right motivation, running is not a problem. I careened around the garage, sprinted along the front of the house, and I catapulted myself through the front door, slamming it firmly behind me. Breathless and terrified, I realized that I had peed in my pants. I'm not a small man. I'm 6'1" and 240 pounds. I played hockey all my life, so I think it's safe to say that I'm pretty tough. I've engaged in extreme sports such as skydiving and deep-sea diving with sharks, so I think it's safe to say that I'm also brave. But I couldn't sell that house fast enough. We moved closer to civilization, and I'm now a gun owner, and I'm completely obsessed with these things. I won't go into any woods to this day. Even so, I carry a 10mm Glock with me most of the time. It's changed my whole life, my whole outlook, and my whole attitude. I believe the government tells us lies. They know about these things and that the numbers are much higher than anyone has imagined. They mainly cover it up for money, but they're leaving a lot of people vulnerable. People go into the woods all the time and never come back out because they don't know the dangers that await them there. It's scary to think about, and it's not right. And he signs off, and man, I can't imagine flipping on a flashlight. Boom, it's like a horror movie. You know, it's like these horror movies. These people flip on the lights and, oh, there's a monster right there in front of them. And that's what this man saw, and it has changed his life. He won't go in the woods. He carries all the time. And he believes that the government is covering this up and that the woods are dangerous. But what a scary encounter. And if I was him and if I had seen what he saw, I don't think I would be as comfortable going in the woods as I am now. Sir, is a great story. I really appreciate you sending it, and it may be good advice to a lot of people, and I really appreciate that. Thanks for the story. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you're having a great start to your new year. I really hope 2021 is a fantastic year for everybody, and hopefully it'll be another year of sharing strange stories from Dixie Cryptid and the What If It's True podcast. We'll see you on the next video. Thanks.